She arrived in red, not just any red, a defiant red, bold, like a wound that refused to, close, brilliant, like the last flicker of a fire refusing to die out. The crowd outside the towering Stratoscorp venue hushed for a second, then erupted into whispers. Cell phones rose. Camera flashes snapped. She didn't flinch. Celeste Moreau stepped out of the sleek silver car like she had rehearsed it for weeks, and maybe she had. A crimson gown hugged her figure, elegant but daring, and on her arm was a man, too young to belong in this world of business tycoons and executive secrets. Jackson, young, handsome, and carefully chosen. She didn't look around for approval. That wasn't the point. The point was to be seen. And oh, was she seen. If you've ever felt the sting of being replaced, or the quiet ache of needing, to prove you've moved on, hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. This story is for you. But the truth? Celeste wasn't there to rub shoulders. She wasn't interested in speeches or champagne. She didn't care about who won what award. She was there because once, this place, this company, this night, had been hers too. Not in name, maybe, but in sacrifice, in loyalty, in silence. The whispers around her were sharp. Is that her? Did she really bring him here? After everything, she heard them. Every word. She just kept walking, chin high, smile soft but unreadable. Because even the strongest women sometimes show up to remind the world, I'm still standing. They thought she was making a statement with her dress. They thought the arm candy was the headline. But Celeste knew better. She wasn't there for revenge. She was there because part of her, a quiet, stubborn part, still hoped he might walk in. Not to beg, not to fight, just to show up. He hadn't in months. Not since the ink dried. Not for birthdays. Not even for the twins' school play. Maybe this was her way of screaming without a sound. And maybe you know that feeling too, when you hold it all together, on the outside. But something inside you is breaking in slow motion. You carry the kids, the weight, the image. And deep down, you wonder if anyone sees you anymore. Her hand tightened around Jackson's arm. He smiled at her like she was his ticket to some exclusive world. He didn't know she was watching the door, not the stage. As the lights dimmed and the ceremony began, Celeste sat gracefully in her reserved seat, smiling at people she barely remembered, laughing at jokes that felt hollow. But her eyes, they kept drifting to the entrance, waiting, not for validation, for presence. Because here's the truth, some women don't want flowers or diamonds. They just want to matter again. Dear God, tonight, for every woman carrying invisible weight with grace, for every heart that's loved, lost, and still longs for healing, grant peace. Let her know she's not forgotten. Let her know she's enough. And when the world overlooks her, remind her that you never do. Amen. The hours moved slowly, wrapped in shallow speeches and clinking glasses. Celeste smiled like she meant it. She laughed when she had to. But inside, it was a countdown. To what? She didn't know. By now, Jackson had made small talk with half the room. He was doing what he was meant to do. Stand tall, stay charming, look good in photos. But Celeste? She was sinking quietly into the silk of her gown, the weight of pretending tightening around her shoulders like an evening shawl. Every time someone passed and gave her that quick, polite, you're still brave look, she felt a piece of herself retreat. They didn't know. They didn't know she had loved him. Not for his name, not for his empire, but for the way he used to sneak her handwritten notes in coffee mugs, for the way he knew her laugh before he knew her name. They didn't know she once believed he would grow old beside her, not away from her. They didn't know she cried when their daughter asked why Daddy never sat at the dinner table anymore. And they didn't know that tonight wasn't about showing off. It was about seeing if he remembered who she used to be. She stirred the wine in her glass, barely touched it. The room was too loud and too empty all at once, until a quiet stir, not from the stage, from the doors. Heads turned, eyes widened. There he was, no spotlight needed. Everett Moreau walked in without fanfare, but the silence he carried, it said more than any entrance ever could. No tux, no bow tie, just a sharp black suit tailored to a man who no longer cared about impressing anyone, only about showing up for the things that mattered. But that's not what froze her. He wasn't alone. On either side of him, holding his hands, were Arden and Nova. There, twins, dressed in matching little formal wear, smiling nervously. Celeste forgot how to breathe. The room, which had so confidently moved on without him, now bent around his quiet presence like a wave-shifting course. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked for her. And when their eyes met, something passed between them. Not anger, not regret. Something softer, recognition, like two people standing in the wreckage of something they built with love, and broke with silence. He didn't speak yet. He just nodded, as if to say, "I'm here. Finally, I see you." And maybe that's all she ever wanted. Not noise, not fireworks, just for him to arrive when it mattered. Jackson stiffened beside her. The kids ran ahead. Nova jumped into her arms. Arden whispered, "Surprise, Mommy." Celeste's eyes welled. She looked past her daughter's tiny shoulder, back at the man she once called home. He walked slowly toward her, each step erasing months of distance, of stories half told, of apologies left unsaid. What was he doing here? Why now? Why this night? And what would he say when he finally reached her? Stay with us, because what's coming next might not be a reunion, but it will be a reckoning. It always started with the cameras. They didn't blink. They didn't flinch. They didn't care about context. As Celeste stepped from the car, the bright flashes surged like an electric tide, endless, unrelenting, hungry. She gave them what they wanted, a practiced smile, chin raised, hand delicately placed on Jackson's arm. Inside, she felt none of it. The red carpet beneath her heels felt colder than it should have. It had once felt like power. Now, it felt like a stage she never auditioned for. She tightened her fingers on Jackson's wrist. Not possessive, just steadying herself. He leaned in. "They're eating this up." She nodded, lips barely moving. "That's the idea." Every step forward was a memory dragging behind her. This wasn't just an event. It was a return to the empire she helped shape. Once, her name had been whispered with reverence in these very halls, not for spreadsheets or speeches, but for the way she carried herself, with quiet dignity, with warmth that softened Everett's sharp edges. Now, her name returned like a rumor, something gossiped about behind lifted champagne glasses. "Isn't that Everett's ex? She brought someone? Here?" After how it ended, each voice was a stone. She felt them pile up silently on her chest. But Celeste didn't flinch. She posed for the cameras. She tilted her head just slightly. She pressed her hand into Jackson's, as if to say, "I'm not alone. I'm still relevant. I can be desired too. Do you think bringing someone new to an ex's event is bold or broken?" Comment below. Let's talk about it. She didn't hate Jackson. He was kind, in his way. Polite, well-spoken, pretty enough to make people stare, shallow enough not to ask questions that went too deep. But he wasn't Everett. And that was the point, wasn't it? He didn't carry the weight of their past. He didn't look at her with knowing eyes. He didn't see the space between her smiles and ask what was missing. He laughed easily, flirted without fear, posed with the ease of someone who never had to build something from scratch with their bare hands. He was not her future. He was her mask. As they entered the venue, chandeliers scattered light like glitter across silken suits. Laughter rang out. Waiters weaved through with gold trays and glass stems. A live quartet played softly romantic songs from decades past, the kind that made old memories stir where they weren't welcome. Jackson leaned down to whisper, "This place is incredible. You sure you don't want to make a big entrance? I mean, you're the ex-queen of this castle." She almost smiled. Queens don't announce themselves. They let others do it for them. Truthfully, she didn't want a scene. She didn't want to be the center. She just wanted to be seen. Not for scandal, not for shock, for presence, for still standing. A woman with battle wounds in a dress that dared you to look away. Across the room, people noticed. Some looked curious, others uncomfortable. A few gave her that tight, respectful smile that said, "We're glad you came, but we don't know what to do with you now." She gave them nothing back. She floated, or tried to. Behind every movement was a voice she couldn't shake. He should have been the one on your arm tonight. But he wasn't, and he hadn't even confirmed he was coming. The room was shimmering, glass, gold, gowns and grace. But Celeste could feel the pause in the air when she walked past. Not a pause of admiration, a pause of confusion, discomfort. Curiosity twisted into judgment. She moved gracefully between groups, always aware of how many eyes followed her. She knew which women were pretending not to look, and which ones were glancing with envy they'd never admit. She saw the men, some old friends, some former allies, unsure of whether to wave or pretend they didn't see her at all. She kept her expression polite, warm, untouchable. But inside, she remembered. She remembered the headlines that had followed her out of their marriage like shadows. Power couple splits, Moreau empire divided, Celeste steps away after. 12 years CEO focuses on business, wife takes the fall. They never said he left. They never said she cried. They never said there were two children who watched their parents disappear from each other in slow motion. The media wrote it like it was a business deal, and in some ways, maybe it was. Silent signatures, schedules drawn around custody, assets split down to decimal points. But no one documented the night she stood in their kitchen, holding 2 plates of food he never came home to eat. No one saw her tuck the kids in alone, whispering stories with a smile while her heart collapsed in pieces. Her smile tonight was the same kind. Beautiful, composed, empty. Jackson returned from a quick photo op by the step-and-repeat wall, adjusting his cufflinks. They asked if we're official, he said, grinning. Told them we're exploring things. She looked at him with a tilt of her head. Exploring? He shrugged. You know, letting them run with it. It's good press for both of us. There it was, again. The difference. To him, this was exposure. To her, it was exposure of another kind entirely. He didn't realize that the man she once loved built this entire night from the ground up. That every banner, every award, every speech had roots that grew from her late-night editing of his first pitch deck. From her belief in him when there was no staff, no building, no brand. She was the wind at his back when there was nothing but doubt. And now, she was a rumor walking in heels. Someone in a sequin dress walked by, paused just long enough to look Celeste up and down, and whispered far too loudly, "Wow, she really showed up like nothing ever happened." Celeste turned, smiled softly, and replied, "That's the thing about moving on. It looks like peace to some, and pride to others." The woman blinked, said nothing, walked away. Jackson leaned close. That was savage. Celeste's smile faded as soon as she turned her face away. She was tired of surviving with grace. By the 3rd round of speeches, Celeste had heard Everett's name mentioned 3 times, each one twisted like a wire in her chest, not because she wanted him to be forgotten, but because everyone kept speaking of him as if he were a relic. A legend no longer present, a founder whose name still held weight, but whose presence was firmly in the past. They had moved on from him. Publicly, so had she. But in the private corners of her mind, she remembered a different man. Not the one in the headlines. The one who used to warm her hands when they were walking to class and the Chicago wind turned her fingers numb. The one who bought her a paper ring from a vending machine the day he swore he'd marry her, even if they never had a dime. She remembered the way he looked at her when their twins were born. Stunned, undone, speechless for once in his life. She remembered a man who had once shown up. Until he didn't. That was the part the headlines missed. It wasn't a scandal that ended them. It was silence. Celeste sat at her assigned table near the front of the room, surrounded by familiar strangers. The chairs were plush. The cutlery gleamed. Each course came plated like artwork, but she barely touched a thing. Across from her, Jackson charmed the woman to his left, laughing easily, tossing his hair the way models do in cologne commercials. His presence filled space, but not substance. She watched him while stirring her water with the edge of a fork, her thoughts drifting. He's not the villain, she reminded herself. He's just the placeholder. He didn't know that her first time at this annual event, she'd worn borrowed heels and sat in the back corner. Everett had been up for his first innovation award. His hands were trembling so badly she had to fasten his cufflinks for him in the lobby, whispering, "You were made for this. Go show them." He had kissed her forehead and said, "Only because you see me when I forget how." Now, there were no trembling hands, no whispered blessings, just strangers in tailored clothes and empty congratulations. Celeste's gaze scanned the stage. The new interim CEO was giving a speech. The room applauded. Someone lifted a toast. The crowd responded, obediently. She clapped, too, politely. It was all so clean, controlled, well-rehearsed, and yet beneath the chandeliers and the glittering smiles, she felt the current running beneath her skin. He should have been here, not for attention, not for headlines, But for her, if only to look her in the eye and say, I still remember who we were, but nothing. Not even a text from the nanny saying he'd asked about the kids. Even that would have been something. A signal, but all she had tonight were half smiles, soft wine, and a man beside her who couldn't even see that her silence wasn't peace. It was holding back tears with every breath. Later, during a break between awards, Celeste slipped away from the crowd and found herself in the empty corridor just outside the main ballroom. The noise dulled to a hum behind thick doors. She leaned against the wall, finally breathing. Her hand rested lightly on her chest. She didn't know why. Maybe to feel the thud of her own pulse. Maybe to remind herself she was still alive under all this performance. She pulled her phone from her clutch and stared at the lock screen. A photo of Arden and Nova. At the beach, sunburned and sticky with salt water, laughing so hard their eyes were shut. She blinked fast. No messages. No missed calls. Not even from him. She locked the screen again. Back inside, the orchestra shifted to a softer tune. The next set of awards were being presented. Jackson waved her over, oblivious to the shift in her posture. She walked slowly back to the table, nodding to a few people as she passed. But her mind was somewhere else. She wondered if he was watching the live stream, if he'd heard the presenter mention his name in tribute. She wondered if he regretted anything, or if she had just become a framed photograph in a life he'd packed, away like an old award, polished occasionally, but never touched. She didn't want him back, not like before. She just wanted to know she still mattered, that 12 years and 2 children hadn't been invisible, that the quiet ways she loved him, packing his bags for red-eye flights, writing notes for his hotel pillows, memorizing his stress habits, hadn't gone unnoticed. Because that's the kind of love women give without needing applause. But tonight, for once, she needed to be seen. Fully, truthfully, not for the gown, not for the headlines, for the ache she carried so gracefully it looked like confidence. And then, just as dessert was being served, a ripple, not in her mind, not in her chest, in the room, subtle at first, then unmistakable, the kind of stillness that only comes when something or someone enters and shifts everything by simply existing. The servers paused. Someone near the entrance gasped, then lowered their voice. The crowd turned slowly. Celeste froze. Her eyes moved, careful, cautious. And there he was, long before the headlines, before the boardrooms, before the distance. There was just them, 2 college students clinging to each other in a cramped dorm room with flickering lights and a broken heater. Chicago winters outside, ramen steam and warm blankets inside. Celeste remembered how Everett used to trace invisible circles on her wrist while they studied. He never needed music. Her presence settled him. They shared everything back then. Coffee, class notes, dreams that barely fit inside those 4 concrete walls. One night, after a late library shift, they'd walked 4 blocks in the cold just to split a $1 taco plate. She had joked, "This is romantic poverty." He looked at her, dead serious, and said, "One day, you'll have a chef who cooks your tacos." She had rolled her eyes and laughed, but deep down she believed him. He was driven, focused, sharp like glass, but with her, he softened. He could rest. And she bloomed under his belief. He always said she was his quiet compass. She didn't need to shout. Her presence always pointed him home. Their wedding was small, barefoot on a beach they couldn't afford to fly their families to. Just them, a friend with a license, and a promise made with sand between their toes. They kissed like they had all the time in the world. And for a while, they did. Stratos Corp was born in their living room. A second-hand laptop, a whiteboard on the wall. Celeste managed emails, cold-called investors, corrected Everett's typos, and brought him takeout between pitch meetings. She stayed up proofreading pitch decks while nursing the twins. She cheered him on from the bleachers when they couldn't afford daycare, and had to take meetings at the park with toddlers crawling over her lap. She never complained, because his dream was hers too, because every success felt like their success. Until slowly, it didn't. It started small, a missed dinner, then 2, then weeks where they spoke more through assistants than face-to-face. He was always in a meeting, on a plane, closing a deal. She started to learn the time difference between her kitchen in Zurich, Tokyo, Dubai, not out of curiosity but out of survival. It was the only way to guess when she might hear from him. He sent gifts. Beautiful ones. Expensive ones. Once, she opened a velvet box to find a diamond bracelet engraved with the initials of their children. No note. No call. Just a transaction wrapped in luxury. She wore it once, then tucked it in the back of her drawer. Not out of spite. Out of grief. Because she missed her husband. Not the man on magazine covers. Not the speaker at conferences. The one who used to leave sticky notes on the fridge that read, "Don't forget you're my favorite person." The one who used to fall asleep with his head on her lap, mumbling about his latest idea while she played with his hair until he snored softly. She missed that Everett, and she began to wonder if he'd left long before the lawyers ever arrived. Their 11th anniversary was supposed to be quiet. Just dinner. No staff. No press. She'd cooked his favorite meal, pulled out their old wedding playlist, set the table like it was 2009. He never came. A merger had been finalized in Zurich. His assistant texted her at 9:43 p.m. "Apologies, he's tied up in post-deal briefing. We'll reach out tomorrow." He didn't. Celeste washed the dishes in silence. No tears, just the sound of plates and running water. She threw out the untouched dessert the next morning and scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney that afternoon. She had expected him to fight, not with raised voices or shattered vases. Everett wasn't made like that. But maybe a call, a knock on the door, a letter, a plea, something. She expected a moment where he'd finally say what she'd been aching to hear for years. "Don't go." But when the papers were served, he didn't come home. When he signed them, there was no delay, no hesitation, just a pen stroke, as clean and simple as a transaction, and it broke her in a way that no betrayal ever could, because if he had argued, she would have known he still cared. If he had begged, she would have seen a flicker of the man who once fought for her. But instead, nothing. She had packed up her side of the closet quietly one morning while the twins were still asleep. A drawer of perfume bottles, her journals, a photo frame that still held their wedding picture behind a stack of insurance forms. She had stood in the middle of their bedroom, letting the silence press in. That was the moment she knew the marriage had ended long before the paperwork had arrived. It ended in the pauses, the missed birthdays, the unanswered texts that turned into unasked questions. It ended not in fire, but in frost. Xio parenting was an arrangement, not a relationship. Schedules exchanged through assistants, emails about who would take the kids to appointments, logistics. No emotion. She remembered one day dropping the twins off at his temporary apartment, modern, minimal, with no trace of their old life, and seeing Everett come to the door wearing a black t-shirt and old jeans. Not the man in designer suits, not the mogul on magazine covers, just a man. He had smiled politely, said, "Thank you," nothing more. Celeste had gotten back into her car and gripped the steering wheel for a full 10 minutes before she could even drive. What haunted her wasn't that he let her go. It was how easy he made it look. But the world kept spinning. Everyone wanted her take. Some whispered she was brave. Some said she was foolish. A few called her lucky. They didn't know that she sat on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m., some nights, staring at old text messages, rereading them as if they might change with enough hope. They didn't know how many mornings she stood in front of the mirror, applying concealer not just for the bags under her eyes, but for the weight of being invisible to the only man whose gaze had ever mattered. She smiled for the twins. She smiled for interviews. She smiled for friends. But she stopped smiling for herself. And then, one day, he was gone. Not just from her life, but from everything. Everett Moreau announced a leave of absence from Stratos Corp. He sold most of his shares, stepped down quietly. No press tour, no dramatic exit, just vanished from headlines. Some said burnout, others suspected scandal, but no one knew for sure. Celeste didn't ask. She couldn't, because if she let herself reach out now, it would undo everything she had built to survive. But the silence he left behind wasn't peaceful. It was loud in all the places where love used to live. It hit him slowly, not all at once, like people imagine. Everett didn't wake up one morning full of regret. He didn't have a single breakdown or some dramatic moment of epiphany. It came in quiet flashes. A spoon left in the sink, a crayon drawing folded in half on the floor, a calendar alert for an anniversary that no longer belonged to him. At first he thought stepping away from the company would feel like freedom. He was tired, tired of performing, tired of shaking hands and pretending not to feel empty. He told his board it was a temporary wellness retreat, but it wasn't wellness he was seeking. It was clarity, and maybe, just maybe, it was punishment. He rented a quiet property on the edge of Oregon. Not beachfront, not chic, just land. Apples, oddly enough, grew there. Rows of crooked trees with branches that needed tending. Fruit that bruised easily if you didn't pick it with care. He knew nothing about farming, but for the first time in years, he wanted to know something new, something that didn't ask for profit margins or headlines. So he learned, quietly, without anyone watching. The dirt under his fingernails wasn't a metaphor. It was real. The ache in his lower back from carrying crates, the blisters from pruning. He welcomed them. He had spent years accumulating wealth. Now, he wanted to understand presence. He started waking up early. No alarms, just instinct. No meetings, no flights, no glass offices with skyline views. Just silence. And in that silence, something happened. He missed them. Not abstractly. He missed the exact weight of Nova sleeping against his chest after she refused to go to bed without one more story. He missed Arden's obsession with lining her crayons by shade instead of size, and how he used to tease her by mixing them up just to hear her fake scold him. He missed Celeste's voice when she wasn't tired, when she used to hum while folding towels, when she used to touch his arm lightly while passing behind him in the kitchen. He missed the version of himself who knew how to notice those things. One night, Everett sat outside beneath a sky so wide it felt almost cruel, and stared at an email he never sent. He had written it after Arden's school play. He had promised to go. He hadn't. A last-minute call with investors overseas had run long. In the email, he wrote, "I keep thinking I'm building something for us, and then I look up and realize there's no us left in the room." He deleted it, not because he didn't mean it, but because he wasn't sure it mattered anymore. He still wore his wedding ring for a while after the divorce, not out of denial, out of mourning, because no one teaches you how to grieve the living, how to say goodbye to someone who isn't gone, but just isn't yours anymore. Have you ever lost someone not because of betrayal, but neglect? Let us know in the comments. And if this story is speaking to you, give it a thumbs up. Your story might help someone else feel seen. One morning, he was hauling a bucket of apples toward the shed when he heard laughter. Small, high-pitched, children. He turned to see a local family walking through the edge of the property. A mom, 2 kids, probably around Arden and Nova's age. The younger one turned, smiled at him, waved. He waved back, forcing a small smile. And something inside him broke wide open. It had been months since he'd heard his children laugh in person. Months since he'd watched them sleep, tuck them in, kiss their foreheads goodnight. He had traded presence for power. He had thought success meant sacrifice. But now that he had both neither title nor touch, he understood. He hadn't lost his family all at once. He'd let them slip away a moment at a time. A bedtime missed. A recital skipped. A silence left unbroken. Until the day came when there was no more we, just scheduled weekends and a woman he could no longer call home. The day he called Celeste, he didn't expect her to answer. But she did. Her voice was neutral, not cold, not warm, just steady, like someone who had stopped expecting apologies. "Is everything okay with the kids?" she asked. "They're perfect," Everett said quietly. "Better than I deserve." A pause. He didn't rush it. "Then I wanted to know if I could spend a few extra days with them this month, on the property." Another pause. Longer this time. She finally said, "They'd like that," and she hung up. Arden was the one who broke the silence first. They were sitting under a crooked apple tree, peeling fruit with plastic knives and giggling about worms. She looked up at him suddenly and asked, "Why don't you smile like Mommy anymore?" He blinked. "I do smile," he said gently. "Not like you used to," she replied. "You used to smile with your eyes." It stunned him, how easily children could speak truths adults were too afraid to voice. Later that night, after they fell asleep, he sat at the edge of the porch, replaying her words over and over. "Smile with your eyes." He wasn't sure he even remembered how, but he wanted to learn again. The next morning he made pancakes. Terrible ones, burned and uneven. Nova laughed so hard she cried. Mommy put smiley faces on hers. He smiled back. Next time, I'll ask her for the recipe. Arden grinned. Can we visit her today? He hesitated. Do you think she'd want that? He asked. She misses us. I think she misses you too. Did she say that? No, but she looked sad when we left. Even in her eyes. There it was again. The eyes. That evening, Everett packed a small overnight bag for the kids. He found their semi-formal outfits, the ones Celeste had picked out months ago for school pictures, still neatly folded in the side closet. He dressed them with care, brushed Arden's hair the way Celeste used to do, with a part just slightly off-center. Nova wore mismatched socks. He didn't correct her. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his collar. No tie, no bravado, just enough polish to show up without distraction. He wasn't dressing to impress. He was dressing to take responsibility. He didn't tell anyone he was coming, didn't alert the organizers, didn't bring security, didn't need applause. He arrived with 2 reasons that outweighed every deal he ever signed. The ride to the venue was quiet. Nova sang softly to herself. Arden stared out the window. When they arrived, the driver offered to pull around discreetly. Everett shook his head. No. We'll walk in like everyone else. And as the doors opened and the crowd turned, as cameras dropped and voices stilled, he realized it wasn't the company's legacy that brought him back. It wasn't for show. It was for the woman who once loved him without proof, the children who still believed he could be better, and the version of himself he lost somewhere between ambition and absence. The doors parted. He stepped forward, not with confidence, with clarity. He wasn't here to claim. He was here to own what he let slip. It was nearly midnight, and the music had changed. The upbeat tempo that carried the crowd through speeches and staged. Smiles had slowed to something softer, dimmer, almost apologetic. But no one noticed. Except her. Celeste sat at the edge of the ballroom in a high-backed chair that felt more like a throne than a seat, surrounded by laughter that wasn't hers and conversations she couldn't follow. People were still mingling, still smiling, but their eyes had begun to drift toward the exits, toward valet tickets, toward after-parties. She was still smiling too, but it felt more like a reflex than a choice. Jackson was busy taking pictures with a few low-level celebrities near the dessert table, flashing his perfect grin like he'd just won something. He hadn't. Not really. Celeste let her fingers glide along the rim of her glass. She hadn't taken more than a sip all night. Her lipstick barely smudged the edge. She looked down at her lap, then up at the glittering lights that felt too bright now. Something inside her felt off balance. Not angry, not broken, just hollow. She had come here to be seen, to prove something, to herself, to the world, maybe to Everett. But now, with the night winding down and nothing left to perform, all she felt was tired. She stood slowly and excused herself with a graceful nod to a nearby guest. Her heels whispered against the marble as she made her way out of the main room and toward the quiet corridor that led to the balcony. The cold air met her like a balm. Finally, the noise slipped away. The view stretched out below, city lights like stars caught in glass. Movement everywhere, yet none of it touched her. She placed both hands on the railing, letting the wind pull at the edges of her hair. Her dress shimmered slightly in the moonlight, but it wasn't the gown that made her look radiant. It was the stillness. Out here, no cameras followed. No one watched. Just her, and the ache she didn't have to hide anymore. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She thought about the way Nova used to sing her to sleep when she was too exhausted to speak. She remembered Arden insisting on helping with her makeup one morning before a meeting, applying blush with sticky fingers and saying, "Now you look like magic." She remembered waking up in a too large bed and reaching across for a hand that wasn't there anymore. "You did this," she whispered inwardly. "You asked for distance. You signed the papers." But tonight, she realized something she hadn't admitted before. She didn't want to move on. She wanted to heal. There's a difference. Behind her, the doors clicked. She turned slightly, expecting a waiter. What she saw instead stopped her breath. The door didn't slam. It didn't creak. It simply opened. And with it, the air changed. Celeste turned her head, slowly, her body still angled toward the view. And there he was, Everett Moreau. No fanfare, no entourage, no headlines to announce his return. Just a man in a black suit, crisp but casual, his hands steady at his sides, his face unreadable, but softened. And he wasn't alone. On either side of him, clutching his hands, were the two people who could undo her with a glance. Arden, Nova, dressed in the clothes she'd packed months ago and forgotten about. Nova's bow was slightly crooked. Arden's shirt was missing a button. But they were here, with him. Celeste's chest tightened. For a second, her mind refused to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. She blinked. The children saw her, and everything else disappeared. They ran. Fast. No hesitation. No performance. Just love. Arden threw her arms around her waist. Nova wrapped herself around her legs, giggling. "Mommy, you look like a princess." Celeste dropped to her knees, gathering them both in a clumsy, breathless embrace. She didn't cry. She held her breath instead, because letting it out might shatter her. "I thought you were with Dad," she whispered. "We were," Arden said, eyes wide. "We told him you'd be lonely," Nova added. "We saw pictures of you online. You looked happy, but not all the way." Celeste looked past them, her arms still wrapped tight around their small frames. Everett stood still, just inside the doorway, watching, waiting. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Inside the ballroom, it took less than 30 seconds. The buzz began at the back, waiters whispering near the bar, a guest nudging her partner. Heads turned. Brows lifted. The DJ paused between tracks. Someone dropped a champagne flute, and then it spread, like ripples in water. Everett Moreau was here, unannounced, unexpected, and undeniably present. He stepped forward with calm intent, not to reclaim the room, not to make a scene. He stepped forward for them. He stopped just a few feet from Celeste, who was now standing, the twins still holding her hands. Their eyes met, and in that look, so much passed unspoken. Not bitterness, not accusation, just acknowledgement. He nodded toward the children. "They wanted to surprise you." Her voice was softer than she intended. "You brought them here?" His answer was even softer. "They asked me to." The ballroom doors now stood wide open behind him. The room was silent. Jackson stood near the far corner, blinking like someone watching the plot twist in a film he thought he understood. He looked at Celeste, then at Everett, and without a word, he straightened his jacket and stepped away. Not with drama, not with anger. He simply knew when the moment didn't belong to him. Everett looked down briefly at Nova, who was now tugging at her mother's bracelet. "You're beautiful," Nova whispered to Celeste as if it were a secret. Celeste knelt again to kiss her daughter's forehead, and in that instant, something inside her steadied, not because she had answers, but because the noise had finally fallen away. Everett moved closer, not too close, just enough. "I didn't come for a scene," he said. "I wasn't even sure I'd walk in." She tilted her head. "But you did." He nodded. "They saw you in a photo. They said you looked beautiful and lonely." Celeste inhaled slowly. Everett's gaze didn't waver. "And they were right," he added. For a moment, the world held still. The music inside the ballroom faded into a distant hum, swallowed by the weight of what stood between them. Celeste felt the children's hands wrapped around hers, grounding her, reminding her she wasn't dreaming. Everett stood across from her, steady, quiet, impossibly real. No cameras could capture this. No audience could interpret it. This wasn't a spectacle. This was a fault line shifting. Celeste brushed a lock of hair behind Arden's ear. She didn't trust her voice yet. She was afraid if she spoke too soon, the words would fall apart before they even reached him. Everett took a breath first. "I didn't want to interrupt your night," he said, tone even, almost gentle. "But when they asked to come, I couldn't say no." Celeste searched his face. It had changed in ways she couldn't quite name. Not aged, deepened. The curve of his jaw looked sharper, his eyes calmer. And that faint silver at his beard? It suited him. "What made you bring them here?" she finally asked. He hesitated, not out of fear, but sincerity, because they asked why we weren't together on an important night. "They thought you needed us." The words hit her harder than she expected. Needed us. Not pity, not intrusion, just presence. Arden squeezed her mother's hand and looked up at Everett. "Daddy said it was your big night, so we told him he had to show up." Nova nodded enthusiastically. "We said he needed to stop thinking and just come." Everett let out a small, almost embarrassed smile. They can be very persuasive. Celeste blinked rapidly, her eyes warming. Yes, they get that from me. That they do, he murmured. The twins spotted a dessert table inside and begged to go look. Everett gently guided them to a nearby staff member who offered to keep an eye on them for a minute. When they were out of earshot, a new quiet settled between the adults. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. Celeste leaned lightly against the balcony railing, her fingers brushing the cool metal. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't plan on it, he admitted. But life stopped waiting for me to decide how present I wanted to be. They asked me to come, and I wanted to try. Celeste let the truth sink into her chest. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't rehearsed. It was the kind of truth that arrived only after loss. You look different, she said softly. He met her gaze head on. I feel different. How so? Everett stepped a little closer, not enough to crowd her, but enough that she could see the subtle exhaustion around his eyes. I spent years believing I had to build everything from the outside in. More status, more expansion, more expectations. But when the noise stopped, he paused as if choosing his words carefully. I realized the life that mattered was the one I kept walking away from. The sentence lingered between them. Celeste absorbed it without flinching. I wasn't easy to live with either, she said, surprising herself. I expected you to read my silence like a language. I shut down when I should have spoken up. I assumed you'd know when I needed you, but I never said the words. Everett's expression softened. You shouldn't have had to say them all, and you shouldn't have had to guess, she countered. There it was. Not blame, not anger, understanding. A shared truth that arrived too late to save their marriage, but maybe not too late to save something else. Inside the ballroom, a burst of laughter echoed, breaking the tension for a moment. Celeste glanced toward the doorway. That room never changes, she murmured. Everett followed her line of sight. No. But we did. She turned back to him. Why now, Everett? Why tonight? He didn't hesitate. Because, for once, I didn't want the kids to see me staying away from something important. I didn't want them to think distance was normal. His voice lowered. And when they showed me those photos of you, I realized they were right. You looked beautiful, but you also looked alone. Celeste felt her pulse jump. There it was. The line she never expected to hear, spoken so quietly she almost missed it. They said you looked lonely in the photos. Her throat tightened. Not from hurt, from recognition, because she had been. Even with Jackson on her arm, even with applause around her, even with her stunning gown lighting up the cameras. She'd felt utterly alone, not because she wanted him back, but because she wanted to feel seen again. I wasn't lonely, she whispered. Not exactly. Everett nodded. I know. I just wanted you to know we saw you. All three of us. A waiter passed, pausing briefly as if unsure whether to interrupt. Everett stepped aside instinctively, giving Celeste space. His movements were quieter than she remembered, less urgent, more intentional. Years ago, he would have checked his watch 5 times by now. He would have been itching to return to a meeting or take a call. Tonight, he looked like a man who finally understood the value of being still. Celeste folded her arms lightly, not defensive, just thoughtful. You didn't come here to fix anything, did you? No, Everett said. I came because I'm done hiding from the places where I failed. For the first time in years, she believed him. The moment was still, not frozen, but deliberate, like the world had slowed just enough for clarity to rise through the noise. Celeste stood quiet, letting Everett's words settle deep into the spaces where resentment once lived. There was no script for this moment, no plan. And maybe that was the most honest part. Inside, the event rolled on without them. Polite applause rose. Music played. Toasts were made. But out here, something real was unfolding. Not a reunion, not quite closure. Something in between. Nova came barreling through the balcony doors first, crumbs on her dress and a bright grin on her face. Mommy, they had tiny cheesecakes. She squealed. I took 2. Arden followed, walking more slowly, her eyes flicking between her parents. She sensed the change in the air but didn't speak it aloud. Celeste dropped to one knee, smoothing Nova's curls. Did you say thank you to the waiter? Twice, Nova beamed. Good girl. Everett knelt beside them, brushing something off Arden's sleeve. Ready to head out? Already? Nova frowned. Celeste looked up. You're leaving? He stood. I wasn't going to stay long, just enough to show up. She nodded, slowly. You did. Everett turned to the girls. Say goodnight to your mom. But Arden didn't move. She looked at her father with wide, serious eyes. Are you coming home with us? His breath caught. Not visibly, but Celeste saw it. He crouched again, so he was eye level. Not tonight, sweetheart. Why not? She pressed. Everett glanced at Celeste. Because Mommy and I are still figuring some things out. Nova tilted her head. Like what? He smiled gently. Like how to make better choices. Celeste knelt beside them. And some things take time, my loves. Grown-up hearts move a little slower than little ones. Arden pouted. That's annoying. Celeste laughed softly, her hand brushing her daughter's cheek. Yes, it is. As Everett helped them gather their things, Celeste stepped back toward the balcony railing, watching the city blink below. He joined her again, standing just close enough to feel present, but not intrusive. I'm not trying to rewrite anything, he said quietly. I know what I cost. I know what I didn't protect. But I needed you to hear this from me, not through court papers or headlines. Celeste said nothing. He continued. You weren't replaced. You were neglected. That's on me. She turned her face slowly toward him, and I chose silence when I should have chosen honesty. I gave up without explaining why. Everett held her gaze. Maybe we both made peace with being strangers because it was easier than being honest. Maybe, she echoed. Another pause. Then a small, fragile smile passed between them. Nothing fixed, nothing promised, but something mended. A few guests lingered nearby, watching from a distance. Whispers began again, subtle, restrained. Some saw a scandal. Some saw a reunion. But they didn't matter, because the only ones who understood what had truly happened tonight were standing. Right there, two grown-ups learning how to show up for what they'd once lost. Everett escorted the girls toward the exit, holding one hand in each of his. Celeste followed, just behind. At the car, Arden looked up again. Are you really coming to breakfast tomorrow? Everett leaned down, kissing the top of her head. With pancakes, Nova jumped in. With smiley faces? He grinned. With extra syrup. Celeste opened the door, buckled them in. As she stood back up, she and Everett faced each other once more. No more wait, no more pretending. Just respect. You can join us if you want, she said quietly. Are you sure? I think they'd like it. He nodded. Then, I'll be there. As the car pulled away, Everett stayed behind, watching them disappear into the night. Not like a man who'd been left behind, but like someone who finally understood the value of walking beside, not ahead. Celeste looked back once. He lifted his hand. She returned the gesture. Then she was gone. And still, he didn't feel alone. He had lost her, yes. But tonight, something had returned. Not the marriage, not the past, but something deeper. The beginning of being present. Would you take him back? Or do you think this was closure? Drop your thoughts below. And if this moment stirred something in you, give this video a like and share it with someone who's ever loved, lost, and learned. They sat at a small table near the back corner of the venue, not meant for guests, not part of any seating chart. Just a quiet space tucked between tall plants and velvet drapes far enough from the main ballroom to feel like a different world. The noise was distant now. Laughter echoed from afar. Glasses clinked faintly, like reminders of the room they no longer had to perform in. A single candle flickered between them. Celeste adjusted her bracelet, her hands resting lightly on the tablecloth. Across from her, Everett sat with both palms flat on the table, steady, but not trying to control the air. There were no phones between them, no distractions, just breath, just presence. She looked at the untouched wine between them, two elegant glasses still filled to the rim. No one had taken a sip. Celeste broke the silence first. So, you're growing apples now. A small smile tugged at his mouth. Among other things, do they talk back to you when you ignore them? She said lightly, then glanced down. Sorry, that was... No, Everett said gently. It was honest. She looked up. Their eyes held again. It had taken them years to sit like this, quietly, without needing to win the conversation. I didn't think you'd ever leave the company, Celeste said after a pause. Neither did I, he admitted. Until the day I realized I'd built a fortress I didn't want to live in. She nodded. And now? He tilted his head. Now, I build smaller things, things I can hold, things that don't require me to disappear in order to maintain them. She let that land. It did. A waiter passed by, offering to bring more wine. Celeste shook her head. Everett just pointed at the glasses. We haven't even touched these. The waiter smiled and walked away. Celeste looked down at the drink in front of her, then up at him. I used to keep a bottle of red open every night around 9 p.m. Thought maybe you'd come home and want to talk, or just sit. You never did. His shoulders dropped a little. Not from shame, from truth. I didn't know that. You never asked, she replied. Everett exhaled slowly. There's a list of things I didn't ask, and it's longer than I'd like to admit. She studied him. Do you regret it? He didn't blink. Every part that made you feel alone, yes. But not the work? He shook his head. I regret thinking the work had to cost everything else. There was a beat of silence. Then Celeste leaned forward slightly. I wasn't trying to punish you tonight. Bringing Jackson, I mean. I know. He's not. She paused, searching for the right words. He's not what I want. He's what I thought might cover the noise. Everett didn't flinch. I understand, he said. Celeste looked down at her hands. I tried to convince myself I was over it, that I was thriving. But there were nights when the house was too quiet, and the kids were asleep, and I'd hear the echo of a marriage I never got to bury properly. She looked up again. I thought I hated you, she whispered. Everett's voice was soft. Did you? I tried. I needed to, for a while. A long pause. But deep down, I think I just missed being known. They sat with a kind of stillness that could only come from knowing someone too well. Not strangers. Not lovers. Just two people peeling back the weight of years with words they should have said a long time ago. Everett looked down at the table, tracing the rim of his untouched glass. I thought providing was enough, that as long as I gave you the world, I could afford to miss a few dinners. Celeste smiled, sad, not bitter. You didn't just miss dinners, Everett. You missed me. He didn't look up. He just nodded. I know. I would have rather eaten noodles with you on the floor, she added, than steak alone with your name still on the mailbox. His hands tensed slightly. I used to feel proud when people talked about you, she continued. Like, that's my husband they're clapping for. But after a while, I started clapping too. Not because I was proud, but because I didn't know what else to do. Everett finally looked at her. There was pain in his expression, but not the kind that begged for pity. It was the look of someone listening, really listening. You were always better at chasing big things, she said. Ideas, milestones, risk. I wasn't brave at home, he admitted. Boardrooms didn't scare me. You did. Celeste raised a brow, not insulted, curious. Me. He nodded. Because you saw through everything. You knew when I was running on empty. You knew when I was lying to myself. It's easier to impress strangers than to be seen by someone who actually knows you. Her breath caught at that. Because, yes, she had known. And yes, she had kept watching, long after the version of him she loved disappeared behind plane tickets and endless meetings. Do you remember the night I told you I was done? She asked. I remember everything about that day, Everett said. Down to what shirt I was wearing. You didn't fight. He swallowed. Because I thought you were already gone. Celeste leaned back slightly. I wasn't. Silence settled again, this time thicker. I was waiting for you to notice I was drowning, she said. But you were too busy sailing the ship. Everett sat with that. Let it sit. He didn't defend himself. Didn't deflect. Didn't ask for fairness. Instead, he reached for something far deeper. I built a future, he said slowly, without realizing I was erasing the present. For a while, neither of them spoke. The candle between them flickered, and the room continued on without them. A server walked by, glanced at their untouched drinks, then kept moving. The wine stayed full, still untouched, like everything that had been waiting between them. You know, it's funny, Celeste said finally. What? I used to think the real mistress was another woman, or work, or money. She exhaled. But now I think the real mistress was time. The time we stopped giving to each other. Everett's voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't even notice when I stopped choosing you. But I noticed, she replied. He nodded again. I know. And in that moment, something shifted, not loudly, but deeply. They weren't talking about fault anymore. They were rewriting the story, not with denial, not with guilt, with grown-up clarity. Celeste ran a finger along the edge of the candle holder, her eyes soft but distant. Do you remember that awful motel in Indianapolis? That deal you were chasing, the one that blew up in your face? Everett chuckled. How could I forget? We ordered 1 large fries and lived off it for 2 days. You said it was your lean season, she smiled. I said you were romanticizing poverty again. He grinned. You still ate every fry. Well, I loved you then. He paused. And after? He asked gently. Celeste looked at him. After what? After we had the house, the staff, the success. Did you still love me then? She thought for a long moment. Then, yes. But I stopped liking you. Everett didn't flinch. He nodded once. That's fair. They both smiled, not out of humor, but understanding. I used to miss us so loudly, she said. But over time it faded into background noise. Not silence, just a dull ache. I know that ache, Everett said. I carried it into every hotel room, every layover. He took a slow breath. But I didn't know how to name it until it was too late. Celeste stared at him. You could have just said, I miss you. I didn't think I had the right anymore. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You always had the right. You just never used it. They sat back in their chairs, both exhaling at once, like two people letting go of tension they didn't realize they'd been carrying for years. The music from inside swelled briefly, a soft, classic tune from decades ago. Celeste tilted her head. That's our song. Everett listened. I thought they stopped playing it years ago. I asked the DJ to play it once. The year you didn't come, he looked at her. I danced by myself, she said, almost laughing. At the back of the room. No one noticed. Everett lowered his eyes. I would have, if I had been there. But you weren't, she said gently. No, he agreed. I wasn't. A moment passed. Then Celeste reached across the table and brushed something from his sleeve, a small gesture, meaningless to most. But it stilled him. Her fingers touched his arm for barely a second, then withdrew. No invitation, no lingering, just a silent message, I see you. I'm not asking for anything, Everett said. I know, she replied. I just needed to stop avoiding the things I broke. Celeste nodded. I think I needed that too, just not in the form of another bouquet or another voicemail. I needed you, not your money, not your guilt. Everett gave a faint smile. Do you think we'll ever be able to have coffee like normal people? I think we skipped normal a long time ago. He laughed. True. It was the first time they'd laughed, really laughed, since everything ended. The kind that came not from comedy, but release. Celeste leaned forward. You know, I never hated you for working hard. I hated you for forgetting what you were working for. His smile faded. I forgot a lot of things. But I never forgot you. A long silence passed again, but this one was different. Not heavy, not uncertain, just real. Between them, the 2 wine glasses still sat untouched, and maybe they always would. The ballroom was nearly empty now. A few guests lingered in small groups, their conversations hushed. Waiters cleared plates. The music softened to a low hum, barely there. The night was winding down. But for Celeste and Everett, something was just beginning. Not a romance, not a second chance wrapped in fairy tale ribbons, but something simpler, something rarer. An honest chapter. Celeste rose slowly from her seat, smoothing the folds of her dress. She looked down at the 2 full glasses of wine. Strange, she murmured. All this talking. Not one sip. Everett stood too. Maybe we didn't need anything to loosen our tongues. She smiled, a little tired, a little amused. No, we just needed time. He nodded. And courage. They stood beside the table now, no candlelight between them. No flame required. The spark was elsewhere, burning quietly in the clarity they had just shared. Celeste looked toward the ballroom entrance. I should get back to the kids. They're probably already asking if pancakes are still happening. They are, Everett said quickly. I promised. With the smiley faces, she added, teasing. His face softened. Always. She stepped away from the table, but paused after just a few steps. Then, without turning around, she said, I don't think we failed, Everett. He looked up. She turned halfway back to face him. We loved each other the best way we knew how, and when it stopped being enough, we didn't know how to ask for more. He took a step forward, close enough to be near, but not close enough to reach. I think we became experts in surviving without each other, but not living, she added. He nodded. Not really. They walked side by side toward the exit, past waiters, empty tables, and flickering lights. No one stopped them. No one whispered, because this wasn't a spectacle anymore. It was two people who had finally stopped pretending. At the door, Everett turned to her one last time. You look whole. Celeste's eyes flickered with something hard to name. I'm not, she said, but I'm no longer empty. He smiled, not as a man trying to win her, but as one proud to witness her strength. She smiled back. The door opened. She stepped through it. Everett lingered a moment longer, not watching her leave, just breathing. No final lines, no dramatic ending, just a man standing in the quiet, grateful he'd finally shown up. Not all love stories end in reunion, but some end in redemption. If you believe in growth, forgiveness, and honest healing, subscribe to this channel. Stories like this one matter, because they remind us that showing up, even late, still counts. The air outside had turned crisp, not biting, but sharp enough to make Celeste pull her coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped onto the curb with the girls. Arden and Nova buzzed around her like fireflies, giddy from dessert, music, and the late hour that made everything feel like an adventure. Everett followed a step behind, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding Nova's tiny pink purse she'd refused to carry herself. Celeste glanced over, smirking. You really are leaning into this dad role now. He looked down at the sparkly bag in his hand and raised an eyebrow. Think it suits me. Surprisingly, she said and laughed, not from habit, but from ease. It was a small sound, light and real. The driver opened the car door. Arden climbed in first, still chattering about how she was going to make her own award one day, a best-dressed kid trophy using glitter and glue. Nova stood by the open door, looking up at Everett. You're coming to breakfast, right? He knelt down. I wouldn't miss it. With pancakes? He smiled. With pancakes. With smiley faces. He nodded solemnly. Double eyes, banana smiles, chocolate chip freckles. She leaned in close, whispering, Can we put whipped cream this time? Mommy never lets us. Everett glanced at Celeste, who crossed her arms with a warning smile. We'll discuss it. Nova giggled and climbed into the car. Everett helped shut the door, then turned to Celeste as she lingered on the sidewalk, halfway between saying goodbye and staying longer than she should. She looked at him carefully, the noise of the night behind them now replaced by quiet street sounds and their own shared breath. I meant what I said, she said softly. You can join us tomorrow. If you want. He gave a single nod. I want. No hesitation, no fear, just the kind of answer that comes from finally understanding what matters. The car engine started. Celeste moved to the passenger door, then paused. She turned back for a second. Their eyes met again. No expectation, just a silent thank you for the calm they'd somehow managed to carve out of years of confusion. And then she gave him a small wave, fingers flicking lightly from her side. He returned it, no words. The door closed. The car pulled away. Everett stood still for a long moment, alone again on the sidewalk. The cold brushing across his skin wasn't harsh. It was honest, the kind that reminded you, you're alive. Everett didn't head to his car right away. Instead, he walked, slowly, one hand in his coat pocket, the other brushing the tops of short hedges lining the sidewalk. The night was still, no wind, just the occasional hum of distant traffic and the soft crunch of his shoes against stone. The quiet was familiar now. Months ago, he would have filled a moment like this with a call, an email, a checklist. Now, he just breathed. His mind drifted back to the orchard, the early mornings, the routine. It was never glamorous. The trees didn't care about titles. They grew with or without him. And maybe that was the lesson. He remembered sitting on the porch at sunset, hands stained from soil, watching the sky bleed slowly into shades of gold and ash. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He'd tell himself the silence was healing. That rest was earned. That pulling back meant he was being wise, but in the silence, there had been a noise he couldn't quiet. A whisper that always returned, you left too much unsaid. He had silenced the world, but not his regret. He walked past a storefront now, dark, closed, its glass reflecting a man he almost didn't recognize, not in the way he looked, but in how he stood. Still, present, not postured, not armored. He remembered the first night on the vineyard, drinking tea he didn't like, staring at his phone, wondering if he should text her. He never did. He told himself she deserved space. But the truth? He was afraid. Afraid that she would tell him it was too late, that the damage was done, that her strength had outgrown his return. Tonight, though, he saw something different in her eyes. Not an invitation, not even a second chance, but peace, a peace that didn't exclude him. And for once, that was enough. He paused beneath a dim streetlight, let the quiet settle around him, and thought, not for the first time, about how strange it was that the loudest mistakes were often made in silence. The streetlight above flickered once, then stilled. Everett looked up. The sky above the city was soft, a faded navy scattered with stars you could barely see through the light haze. But he saw them, faint, present, like reminders that even the smallest things can still shine through noise. He slipped his hands deeper into his coat pockets and kept walking. No destination, just movement. Not to escape, but to reflect. He thought about the kids, their laughter, the way Nova always reached for the last pancake even though she couldn't finish it, the way Arden raised one eyebrow just like Celeste when she didn't believe him. He thought about tomorrow morning, how he'd wake up earlier than them, how he'd measure the flour too carefully, how he'd mess up the first few pancakes and serve them anyway, because it wouldn't be about the shape, it would be about showing up. He thought about Celeste, about the way she looked at him tonight, not like she needed him to fix the past, just like she wanted to know he understood it. And maybe that was the most grown-up kind of grace, not forgetting, not erasing, but finally being able to stand next to each other and say, we made mistakes, but we mattered. Everett reached a corner and stopped. Above him was an old street sign. He didn't recognize the name. It didn't matter. He stood there, feeling the stillness in his chest settle deeper. He had nothing left to prove, no one left to impress, no reputation to protect. Just a decision, to keep choosing the things that last longer than applause, to keep choosing the people who looked for him when he disappeared, to keep showing up, especially when it would be easier not to. And as he stood there, hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the cold, the truth surfaced clearly. He had learned the hard way that success without presence is failure in disguise. He turned around and began walking back. Not quickly, not urgently, just with purpose. Tomorrow would come, and this time, he'd be there for all of it. Sometimes the stories that stay with us aren't the ones where love wins. They're the ones where love teaches, where two people meet, change, lose their way, and find a different version of peace. This wasn't a fairy tale. No dramatic kiss in the rain, no last-minute declarations, no promises to start over, but what Celeste and Everett found, in the cracks between memory and maturity, was something quieter, something more useful. Wisdom. There's a moment that happens after every high-stakes chapter in life. A breath, a pause, a quiet that settles over everything, and it's in that quiet where the truth finally has room to speak. Here's what it said tonight. 1. Presence matters more than prestige. Everett built an empire, but he didn't realize the cost until the applause grew louder than the bedtime stories he missed. He once believed that providing meant being a good man, that showing love meant success, stability, reputation. But a house full of comfort is still empty when no one shows up inside it. It wasn't infidelity that broke them. It was absence. And the truth, time, not money, is the most generous love language. Success without presence is failure in disguise. 2. Revenge never heals. Celeste didn't bring Jackson because she was in love. She brought him because she was hurt. Because she needed the room to see her, applaud her, envy her, anything but forget her. She thought the world seeing her with someone new would dull the ache. But it didn't. Because healing doesn't come from being seen by strangers. It comes from being understood by those who once looked away. Jackson wasn't a mistake. He was a mask, and when Everett finally showed up, not for her but for the children, for himself, the performance ended. Sometimes we chase attention when what we truly crave is connection. 3. Children see what adults try to hide. Arden and Nova never read the court filings. They didn't follow the whispers or the headlines. But they noticed when their mother laughed less. They noticed when their father stopped coming around. They noticed when two people who used to orbit each other became strangers in the same photo. It wasn't spite or scandal that prompted Everett to return. It was two little voices asking, why aren't we all together anymore? And more importantly, can we be, just for tonight? They weren't trying to reunite their parents. They were reminding them that love still existed, even if it had changed shape. Kids don't need fairy tale endings. They need honesty, safety, and someone who shows up. 4. Love isn't always romantic. There's a kind of love that doesn't need grand gestures. A kind that walks beside you in silence. A kind that lets go, not because it stopped caring, but because it learned to care differently. That's what Celeste and Everett found at that table. No get back together speech. No promises they weren't ready to keep. Just two people who stopped trying to blame and started trying to understand. She reached across the table once. Just a gentle touch on his sleeve. It didn't lead to a kiss. It led to peace. And that's a kind of love too. Some relationships don't end in reunions. They end in understanding. 5. Forgiveness is a beginning, not an ending. What happened that night wasn't closure in the traditional sense. It was a door opening, a different kind. Forgiveness didn't erase the past. It just stopped letting the past control the future. Everett didn't come back with flowers. He came back with pancakes. Not a metaphor. An actual promise to show up in the morning, sit at the table, and be part of the ordinary, unglamorous routine of real love. That's what redemption looks like. Not a headline. Not a sweeping romantic gesture. Just presence. Forgiveness isn't the end of pain. It's the beginning of growth. And so, the night ended. No one clapped. No spotlight followed them out. No photographer caught the moment where Everett stood still in the cold and realized he didn't feel alone anymore. But you were here for it. And now you know this. Love doesn't always come full circle. Sometimes it finds a new shape, gentler, humbler, more lasting. Sometimes the best endings aren't endings at all, just better beginnings. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you saw yourself in Celeste, Everett, or even in the quiet questions of Arden and Nova, you're not alone. Like this video, comment your favorite part, and subscribe to join the trail. Because here, we tell stories that leave footprints on the heart.